I never thought I'd find myself standing at the edge of losing everything. My home, my pride, and even my sanity. But that's exactly where I ended up because of one woman who decided she owned not just the neighborhood, but also my life. You know those people everyone calls Karen? Well, this wasn't just any Karen. She was the president of our HOA, and trust me, her name might as well have been stamped on every blade of grass in Willow Creek Estates. She walked around like she ruled the world, clipboard in hand, ready to fine anyone who dared step out of line. And let me tell you something. I didn't realize it then, but crossing paths with her would change my entire existence. It started innocently enough. A letter slipped under my door late one Friday evening. The envelope felt heavy, almost ominous, like it carried more than just paper inside. When I opened it, my stomach sank. It wasn't an invitation or a friendly reminder about community rules. No, this was a foreclosure notice. My house, the only thing I had left after years of struggle, was being taken away from me. Over what? A $25 fee for having a mailbox painted the wrong shade of beige. Can you believe that? $25 turned into thousands overnight, thanks to interest charges and late penalties they conveniently forgot to mention. At first, I tried reasoning with them. I went to their meetings, sat through hours of bureaucratic nonsense, and begged for leniency. But no matter how polite or desperate I sounded, nothing worked. That's when I noticed something strange. Every time I spoke, Karen's lips curled into this smug little smile, like she knew something I didn't. At first, I dismissed it as arrogance, but deep down I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on here than met the eye. Why was she so determined to get rid of me? Then came the day I discovered the truth, or at least part of it. While cleaning out the attic, I stumbled upon some old documents belonging to my late father. He used to joke about keeping secrets hidden upstairs, but I always thought he meant family heirlooms or sentimental keepsakes. What I found instead sent chills down my spine. There were blueprints, faded letters, and handwritten notes detailing land disputes dating back decades. One particular entry caught my attention. JR's plot expansion, unauthorized. Below it, scribbled hastily, were the words, "If anyone finds out, we're ruined." Suddenly, everything clicked. This wasn't about mailbox colors or minor rule violations. They wanted my property for something far bigger, and Karen was leading the charge. Unaware of the storm brewing beneath her polished exterior, she continued playing her games, thinking I was just another powerless homeowner she could push around. Little did she know, I still had one card left to play, something that could turn the tables completely and expose her for the fraud she truly was. But before I could act, fate threw another curveball my way. Late one night, as I scrolled through TikTok looking for distractions, I noticed something unusual. My latest rant about the HOA had gone viral. Millions of views, thousands of comments, all pouring in support. People shared their own horror stories, tagging friends, spreading awareness. Within days, I had amassed over 10 million followers, all united by one goal, bringing down corrupt HOAs everywhere. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt hope flicker inside me. Maybe I wasn't alone after all. Maybe together we could fight back. And so, armed with newfound allies and evidence buried in my attic, I prepared for the battle of a lifetime. But as I soon learned, revenge isn't sweet. It's messy, unpredictable, and comes at a cost higher than I ever imagined. I couldn't sleep that night. The attic discovery and the TikTok explosion weighed heavily on my mind, but something else kept nagging at me. Something about Karen. She wasn't just power-hungry. There was a method to her madness. It wasn't random cruelty driving her actions. It was greed. Pure, calculated greed. And now, thanks to those documents upstairs, I had proof of it. The next morning, I decided to dig deeper. Armed with coffee and determination, I combed through every document in the attic. One letter stood out. A handwritten note addressed to someone named J.R. My heart raced as I read it aloud to myself. If anyone finds out about the unauthorized expansion, we'll lose everything. Make sure no one talks, ever. Below it was a signature, L.M. At first glance, it didn't mean much, but then it hit me. L.M. could only be Linda Meyer, the previous HOA president before Karen took over. Suddenly, the pieces started falling into place. This wasn't just about taking my house. It was part of a decades-long scheme involving stolen land, fake permits, and backdoor deals. But why target me? What made my property so special? That's when I remembered an old map tucked away in the corner of the attic. Unfolding it revealed faded lines marking plots of land, some labeled clearly while others were scribbled over. One section caught my eye. It was shaded red, and written beside it in bold letters was Risk Zone. A chill ran down my spine. Whatever they wanted, it was right beneath my feet. As if things weren't complicated enough, another bombshell dropped later that day. While scrolling through comments on my viral TikTok post, I noticed a message from someone claiming to be a former HOA board member. Their username was generic, at Suburban Truth 99, but their words sent shockwaves through me. They wrote, "You have no idea what you're dealing with. Meet me tomorrow at noon outside City Hall. Bring the papers." Part of me wanted to ignore the message. After all, meeting strangers based on internet messages sounded like a recipe for disaster. But desperation has a way of clouding judgment. So, against every instinct screaming at me to stay safe, I agreed. City Hall was bustling with activity when I arrived the next day. Tourists snapped photos, lawyers rushed between meetings, and activists handed out flyers. Standing near the steps, looking as nervous as I felt, was a man in his late 50s wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He introduced himself as Greg, and after exchanging pleasantries, he got straight to the point. "They've been stealing land for years," he said, voice trembling. "Your father knew too much, which is probably why—" He trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. "Why what?" I pressed, clutching the folder tighter. Greg hesitated, glancing around as though expecting someone to jump out and silence him. Finally, he whispered, "Let's just say accidents aren't always accidental." His words sent ice coursing through my veins. Accidents. Like the car crash that killed both my parents 10 years ago? Until now, I'd accepted it as fate, a tragic twist of bad luck. But hearing Greg speak planted seeds of doubt. Could it really have been staged? Was my family targeted because they stumbled onto this conspiracy? Before I could ask more questions, Greg handed me a USB drive. "Everything you need is here," he said urgently. "Be careful who you trust. Not everyone wants justice. They want control." With that cryptic warning, he disappeared into the crowd, leaving me alone with a million unanswered questions swirling in my head. Back home, I plugged the USB drive into my laptop. Files upon files loaded onto the screen, emails, bank statements, surveillance footage, all implicating not just Karen, but several high-ranking members of the HOA in illegal activities stretching back decades. One video file particularly stood out. Clicking play, I watched grainy footage of a heated argument between two men, one unmistakably my father and the other, Karen's predecessor, Linda Meyer. The audio was barely audible, but one phrase echoed loud and clear. "You can't bury the truth forever." Suddenly, everything clicked. The foreclosure notice, the relentless harassment, the smug smiles during HOA meetings, it was all connected. They weren't just trying to take my house. They were trying to erase history itself, erase me. And yet, despite the overwhelming evidence staring back at me, I knew I couldn't act recklessly. These people had resources, connections, and most importantly, no moral compass. If I played my cards wrong, I'd end up like Greg, running scared, or worse, silenced permanently. So, I devised a plan. Using the massive following I'd gained overnight, I began posting teasers hinting at a major expose coming soon. Each post fueled speculation and outrage, drawing national attention to Willow Creek Estates. Reporters started reaching out, asking for interviews. Local news stations covered the growing scandal. Even celebrities tweeted support, amplifying the pressure on the HOA. Meanwhile, I reached out to a lawyer recommended by one of my TikTok followers. Her name was Samantha Hayes, a sharp-witted attorney known for dismantling corrupt organizations. When I showed her the USB contents, she nodded grimly. "This is big," she said. "Bigger than you realize. But exposing them won't be easy. Are you ready for the fight of your life?" Was I ready? Honestly, I didn't know. All I knew was that I couldn't let them win. Not again. Not after everything they'd taken from me. The next morning, I woke up with a plan, but also with dread gnawing at my stomach. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about exposing decades of corruption that had ruined lives, including my family's. But as much as I wanted revenge, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into something far bigger than I could handle alone. Still, there was no turning back now. Every post I made, every comment I responded to on TikTok, brought more eyes to the story, and more heat from the HOA. Karen must have sensed something was off because she showed up at my door later that afternoon. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her designer sunglasses perched on top of her head like some sort of crown. She looked every bit the queen bee she thought she was, but today her smile didn't reach her eyes. There was a sharpness in her gaze, a predatory glint that sent chills down my spine. "Can we talk?" she asked sweetly, though her tone dripped with insincerity. I hesitated before opening the door wider. "About what?" She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, scanning the room like she owned the place. "Look," she began, pacing back and forth, "I know you've been stirring things up online, and while I admire your creativity, spreading lies isn't going to solve anything." "Lies?" I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "You mean like the unauthorized land expansion? Or maybe the forged documents implicating my father in trespassing charges?" Her face paled for a split second, but she quickly masked it with another one of her fake smiles. "I don't know where you're getting your information, but if you continue down this path, you'll regret it. Trust me." It was almost laughable how predictable she was. Threats were always her go-to move when cornered. But instead of backing down, I leaned forward, letting her see the fire in my eyes. "You should have thought twice before messing with the wrong person, Karen. Because guess what? Now everyone knows exactly who you are." For the first time since meeting her, I saw genuine fear flicker across her face. It was subtle, a slight tightening around her jaw, a twitch in her hand, but it was enough to confirm what I already suspected. She was scared. Scared of losing control, scared of being exposed. After she left, slamming the door behind her, I sat down at my computer and drafted another post. This time, I included screenshots of the emails Greg had given me. Emails showing not only Linda Meyer's involvement, but also Karen's fingerprints all over the scheme. Within minutes, the internet exploded. Comments poured in faster than ever, calling for investigations, arrests, and justice. Even local news outlets picked up the story, demanding answers from the HOA board. But just when I thought things couldn't get any crazier, Samantha, the lawyer, called me late that night. Her voice was tense, almost frantic. "We need to meet, now." "What's going on?" I asked, clutching the phone tighter. "There's been a development," she said cryptically. "Something big. Meet me at the cafe downtown in 20 minutes. 20 minutes later, I found myself sitting across from Samantha, who slid a manila envelope toward me. Inside were photos, grainy surveillance images taken outside my house. At first glance, they seemed harmless enough, But then I noticed something chilling, a figure lurking in the shadows near my front porch. Whoever it was wore a hoodie pulled low over their face. But the posture, the stance, it was unmistakably familiar. I trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Samantha nodded grimly. Yeah, looks like someone's been keeping tabs on you, probably gathering intel to discredit you or worse. My mind raced with possibilities. Was this some kind of warning or preparation for something far darker? Either way, it was clear that Karen and her cronies weren't going down without a fight. Determined not to let fear dictate my actions, I doubled down on my efforts. Over the next few days, I worked tirelessly with Samantha to compile everything we had into a comprehensive case file. We reached out to journalists, filed formal complaints with local authorities, and even contacted federal agencies specializing in fraud investigations. Meanwhile, my TikTok following continued to grow, with supporters organizing protests outside City Hall and demanding accountability. One evening, as I scrolled through comments thanking me for standing up against injustice, I stumbled upon a message from someone claiming to be Karen's niece. Like Greg, her username gave nothing away at Sunshine State 123. But her words carried weight. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," she wrote. "If you expose them, they'll come after you. They always do." Despite the warning, or maybe because of it, I pressed on. Whatever consequences awaited me, I knew one thing for certain. Silence wasn't an option. Not anymore. The days that followed felt like a blur of adrenaline and paranoia. Everywhere I turned, it seemed like eyes were watching me, some sympathetic, others hostile. My TikTok posts had ignited a wildfire, but with the attention came risks I hadn't anticipated. People started messaging me nonstop, sharing their own horror stories about HOAs, corrupt officials, and stolen properties. At first, it was empowering to know I wasn't alone, but soon the sheer volume of messages became overwhelming. Strangers sent tips, warnings, even threats disguised as advice. One message in particular stuck with me. "They're not going to let you win. Watch your back." I tried to shake it off, telling myself this was just part of the process. But deep down, I knew they were right. Karen and her cronies weren't used to losing, and now that I'd exposed them, they weren't going to sit quietly while their empire crumbled. Still, I refused to back down. Every threat only fueled my determination further. Then, one morning, I woke up to find an envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a court summons. The HOA was suing me for defamation, claiming everything I'd posted online was false and damaging to their reputation. As if that wasn't bad enough, there was also a notice demanding immediate payment of all outstanding fines or face eviction within 30 days. It was a calculated move designed to intimidate me into silence. And honestly, for a moment it worked. Doubt crept in like poison, whispering lies about how foolish I'd been to think I could take on someone as powerful as Karen. But then I remembered something Greg had said during our brief meeting. Not everyone wants justice. They want control. Those words echoed in my mind, grounding me. This lawsuit wasn't about truth or fairness. It was about fear. They were scared because they knew I was close to uncovering something big, something that could destroy them completely. And suddenly, I realized what I needed to do next. Instead of panicking, I leaned harder into the chaos. I posted the summons online along with screenshots of the forged documents and altered land surveys. "If they want a fight," I wrote, "then let's give them one." Within hours, hashtags like #expose Willow Creek and .HOA corruption trended nationwide. Journalists reached out asking for interviews. Protesters gathered outside City Hall, holding signs that read, "Stop stealing our homes," and "Justice for Willow Creek." Even local politicians weighed in, calling for investigations into HOA practices across the state. Meanwhile, Samantha and I worked tirelessly behind the scenes. We filed counterclaims against the HOA, accusing them of fraud, forgery, and harassment. We subpoenaed records from the city planning department, hoping to find concrete proof of the unauthorized expansions mentioned in the USB files. Slowly but surely, pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. Each discovery brought us closer to the truth, and closer to dismantling the web of lies Karen and her predecessors had spun over decades. One night, as I sifted through stacks of paperwork, I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. Buried among old invoices and property deeds was a letter addressed to my father. Dated just weeks before his death, it contained a chilling warning: back off, or else. Below it, scrawled hastily, was another note: this isn't worth dying for. Tears welled up in my eyes as realization hit me like a freight train. My parents' accident hadn't been random. It had been planned. Someone had deliberately silenced them to protect secrets buried beneath Willow Creek Estates. For hours, I sat there staring at the letter, anger and grief warring inside me. Part of me wanted to scream, to break things, to unleash the storm brewing inside. But instead, I channeled that pain into action. This wasn't just about reclaiming my home anymore. It was about honoring my parents' memory by exposing the truth they'd died protecting. The next day, armed with new evidence, I met with Samantha to strategize our next move. She listened intently as I explained my plan, nodding occasionally but remaining quiet until I finished. Finally, she leaned forward, her expression serious. "You understand the risks here, don't you?" she asked. "Taking this public means putting yourself directly in the crosshairs. These people will stop at nothing to protect themselves." "I'm already in their crosshairs," I replied firmly. "What choice do I have?" Samantha sighed, running a hand through her hair. "All right then, let's finish this." Over the next week, we prepared for the ultimate showdown. Using social media as our platform, I released a series of explosive updates detailing every dirty secret we'd uncovered, from bribes paid to city officials to fake permits issued for illegal construction projects. With each post, the pressure mounted, forcing authorities to act. By the time the hearing date arrived, the entire nation was watching. Walking into the courtroom that morning, I felt a strange mix of fear and resolve. On one side sat Karen and her lawyers, smug smiles plastered across their faces. Across from them stood Samantha, calm and composed, ready to tear their case apart piece by piece. As for me, I took a deep breath, gripping the folder containing years' worth of evidence tightly in my hands. Today wasn't just about winning, it was about justice. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled with people who had been wronged by the HOA over the years. Reporters scribbled notes furiously while cameras rolled, capturing every moment of what would soon become national news. I sat at the plaintiff's table, gripping the folder containing all the evidence we'd gathered: emails, forged documents, surveillance footage, and even that chilling letter sent to my father. Across from me, Karen looked unusually pale, her usual smug grin replaced by a nervous twitch. For the first time, she wasn't in control, and it showed. As Samantha stood up to deliver her closing argument, the room fell silent. She didn't mince words. "This isn't just about property lines or fines," she said, her voice steady but fierce. "It's about accountability. It's about exposing decades of greed, corruption, and abuse of power. These people thought they were untouchable. But today, justice will prove them wrong." Her words resonated through the room, earning murmurs of agreement from the crowd. When it was the defense's turn, Karen's lawyer tried to argue that everything had been a misunderstanding, a clerical error blown out of proportion. But no one bought it. Not after everything that had come to light. The jury deliberated for hours, but when they returned, their verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Karen's face crumpled as the judge read the ruling aloud. The HOA was ordered to pay millions in damages, not only to me but also to dozens of other families they'd exploited over the years. Their assets were frozen pending further investigation, and Karen herself faced criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and harassment. As she was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, satisfaction, and an overwhelming sense of closure. But this victory wasn't just mine. It belonged to everyone who'd ever been silenced, bullied, or pushed around by those in power. Outside the courthouse, supporters cheered, holding signs that read, "Justice prevails," and "No more Karens." Strangers hugged me, thanking me for standing up against injustice. One woman handed me a bouquet of flowers, tears streaming down her face. "You've given us hope," she said. Her words stuck with me long after the crowd dispersed. That night, sitting alone in my kitchen, I scrolled through messages pouring in from across the country. Many thanked me for inspiring them to fight back against similar injustices. Others shared stories of their own battles with HOAs, landlords, or corrupt officials. Each message reminded me of something important. This fight wasn't just about me. It was about creating a movement where people refused to stay silent in the face of oppression. Still, there was unfinished business. My parents' death weighed heavily on my mind. Though I couldn't bring them back, I vowed to honor their memory by continuing to fight for others. With Samantha's help, I launched a non-profit aimed at educating homeowners about their rights and providing free legal resources to those facing unfair treatment. We named it Justice for JR, a tribute to my father and a promise to keep his legacy alive. As weeks turned into months, life slowly began returning to normal, or at least as normal as it could be after such upheaval. Reporters stopped calling, protests died down, and Willow Creek Estates became a distant memory. Yet every time I passed the spot where my mailbox used to stand, I couldn't help but smile. That tiny patch of beige paint had sparked a revolution, one that changed countless lives, including my own. And so, here's my final message to anyone reading this. If you're facing injustice, don't give up. Fight back, speak out, find allies, and remember, you're stronger than you think, because sometimes all it takes is one person willing to shine a light in the darkness to spark a movement. If this story inspired you to stand up for yourself, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Together we can create a world where justice always prevails.